Welcome to the Real Clear Politics Takeaway. I'm Andrew Walworth, and my guest today is Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who is both the former Secretary General of NATO and former Prime Minister of Denmark. We are talking about America's role in the world in these early days of the Biden presidency, what the particular challenges are of this moment, and how America can lead in what is an increasingly multipolar world. Anders, welcome to the program. So let's dive right in.
Thank you.
If I had to state what the Biden foreign policy goal is, based on what is admittedly these early days, I would say it is we're back. That somehow in the last 4 years, we were missing in action on the world stage. Now, according to Biden and his team, we're going to re-engage. Is that a fair summary of where America is right now? And do you think America was somehow not engaged in the world for the past 4 years?
Yes. America disengaged, and that's why the world is on fire. I mean, we know from history, at once the Americans retreat, they will leave behind a vacuum or a void, and that void will be filled by the bad guys. That's exactly what we're seeing. Putin, President Putin of Russia, Xi Jinping of China, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Assad of Syria, even President Erdogan of Turkey, all those leaders have exploited the void. They have got more room of maneuver. So what we do need is American re-engagement. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing America back.
So let's talk about NATO for a second in particular, because one thing that President Trump did was demand that NATO countries up their contribution. I know that wasn't wasn't totally up to because of what he did, that there was a move to do that that preceded him. But that was very popular here in the United States. It was something that he ran on. It's something that he pointed to as an achievement. And other U.S. presidents have asked the same thing. And it is true that under Trump, it looks like the European countries, and there's about 30 NATO countries in the alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance organization, that this was something that he pointed to as being a good thing. How was it viewed in Europe?
Yeah, but I think we should give Trump credit on this point, because he used some harsh rhetorics that paid off. But you're right, we made that decision formally already in September 2014. Actually, it was my last summit as NATO Secretary General. We decided that within the next 10 years, all NATO allies would live up to the target of spending at least 2% of their total production, GDP, in defense. At that time, only 3 allies lived up to that target. Today, it's almost half of the allies, 15, have already fulfilled the target or are pretty close to fulfilling the target. And I think it is not least thanks to Trump's harsh rhetoric. So in that respect, NATO has been, I would say, militarily strengthened during the term of President Trump. Also because NATO has strengthened its territorial defense by deploying more troops to Eastern Europe. All that is good, militarily strengthened. But the problem is that politically, NATO has been weakened because President Trump raised doubts about his commitment to the famous Article 5 of the NATO Treaty that states that we consider an attack on one ally an attack on all. And President Trump declared that he couldn't guarantee that he would help a NATO ally if that ally did not pay his bills. That's the way he framed it. So by that, he undermined NATO politically. And once an American president publicly raises doubts about his commitment to Article 5, he might tempt adversaries, like, for instance, President Putin, to test the resolve of America and the resolve of NATO.
So, the criticism of the Biden administration, and to some extent, we are, historically, we may view this as a restoration. That's the way some people are describing the Biden administration. And it's very early days, so we should caution that we know too much about what's going to happen. But the criticism was always that America was now leading from behind, that this involvement in multilateral organizations, this involvement in treaties was somehow less a form of leadership than you would see under sort of a muscular America First program that Trump advocated. And I'm just wondering, is that a false dichotomy? Can you do both? Is that too simplistic? What do you think?
Well, the problem was that during the Trump administration or his term, we didn't see an American leadership at all. But the road down this slippery slope started already during the Obama presidency, because at that time you had the headline "leading from behind." And obviously you cannot lead from behind. But he paved the way for what I would call a fully fledged isolationist Trump. He didn't lead at all. He disengaged from the world, and he cozied up with autocrats and dictators in a way that undermined American leadership of the free world. So this is a reason why I would say we have seen autocracies advance during the last 4 years, and we have seen weakening of the free world and multilateral institutions. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's in the interest of America. What made America great was its leadership that was established after the Second World War. President Truman learned the lesson from the Second World War. He established a new world order centered around international law and multilateral institutions, monitored and led by the United States. And all presidents, I would say till George W. Bush, adhered to that principle, irrespective of their party affiliation. But gradually during the Obama years and fully fledged during the Trump administration, we saw American retreat from that new world order that has served America so well for so many years.
The world has changed. There's new sort of a multipolar world, if you will. NATO in particular has refocused on China to some degree as a threat. So the terrain has changed, and I'm wondering if, given those changes in terrain, that rethinking U.S. foreign policy was going to happen anyway, was naturally going to happen, and that we're sort of in the middle of that right now. And it looks messy, but institutions have to change when facts on the ground change, don't they?
Yes, I agree. And of course, the situation, it has changed in many ways, and you cannot just adopt former or foreign policies of the past. But there are some fundamentals that are still relevant. And I do believe that Reagan, who was a very, very strong president of the United States during the 80s, he formulated what I think is still the formula that is relevant, namely peace through strength. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we need. But America can't do it alone. You have to create a global alliance of democracies. If all the world's democracies, if all the free societies of the world join forces, we represent more than half of the world economy. Today, China is the main challenge. And I think more than half of the world economy, that will be a language that is respected and understood in Beijing. And that's a problem that during the Trump administration, he made the struggle with China a bilateral dispute between the US and China, while we need a global alliance of democracies to put more pressure on China. So I think Biden has a good chance of delivering more concrete results to the benefit of the free world.
Yeah, so we're talking just for our audience again. We're talking with Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who's joining me from Copenhagen. He's both the former Secretary General of NATO and the former Prime Minister of Denmark. And I want to talk a little bit about what you're referring to here. And we will link to this an article you wrote on this recently in the Wall Street Journal. It will be on our site, RealClearPolitics.com, so people can learn more. But I think this idea of a democratic alliance as sort of being a way to organize not just U.S. foreign policy, but sort of a global initiative is very interesting. Sort of basing an alliance structure, and I want to know how much of it is economic and how much of it is military, but an alliance structure on ideology, not on sort of geography, which is sort of the way we traditionally think of organizing alliances. Tell me how that would work and what would the U.S. role be in it?
I don't think we can realize the idea of a global alliance of democracies without a clear and determined American global leadership. So it should be more or less led by the United States. But I think the United States needs assistance, so to speak, to run this gathering of the world's democracies. And it's very interesting that the UK, which has taken over the chairmanship of G7 this year, has floated the idea of creating what they call D10. D10 is G7, that is the world's most prosperous economies, and 3 important democracies, namely India, Australia, and South Korea. And that's very interesting because D10 could assist the United States in running this alliance of democracies, which I think would count around 90 or 100 countries across the globe.
Do you see this as a formal alliance structure? Is it an NGO? How does it actually come together from a formal point of view?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we should start modestly. And Biden has pledged to organize and host a summit for the world's democracies later in 2021. I would suppose it will be in the latter part of 21, maybe in connection with the UN General Assembly in September. That's at least a possibility. So I think we should start by organizing this summit and then see from there how it could evolve. But in my thinking, this alliance of democracies should work across the board. Politically, of course, it should stimulate freedom. It should not only protect but also promote freedom and democracy globally. But it could also be a mechanism to help each other economically. I think Alliance of Democracies member states should engage in free trade agreements with each other. They should promote free trade. Maybe we could also introduce what I would call an economic Article 5, like the NATO military Article 5. If one country is targeted, for instance, by China, then the other members of this alliance will come to the aid of that country. For instance, Australia, that has been boycotted by China recently. So we should help Australia. You could also think of more military cooperation between or among the world's democracies. So in my view, it should work across the board, but let's start modestly by this summit later in 21.
When you look forward on this, does this supplant other organizations? Does this come to replace something like NATO or the UN or regional security alliances?
No, I think it's important to stress that it should not it should not replace, for instance, the United Nations, because we need a forum where we can speak with the bad guys.
Mhm.
But what we do need is a forum, a caucus, where the world's free societies can coordinate their efforts more efficiently than today. I think one of the things that is weakening the free world is our disunity. So we need to gang up to work for more profound reforms of the United Nations that works too inefficiently. We need to coordinate our efforts to reform multilateral institutions and organizations like the World Health Organization or the World Trade Organization, World Trade, WTO. So what we need is to strengthen our efforts to promote international norms and standards that fulfill the principles upon which we have built our free societies. Right. So it shouldn't replace those organizations. On the contrary, it should push for reforms of those organizations.
So, you had Joe Biden there in Copenhagen, I think in 2018, to talk about this. And I was struck by something he said, and it's in your article. He said, democracy is all about one simple thing. He said, freedom, freedom, freedom. That's good news, I think. Are you optimistic that Joe Biden and his administration sort of shares your view of the world and will engage in this kind of activity?
Absolutely. We're very much aligned on this. I've known Joe Biden for many years. We worked together when he was vice president and I served as NATO Secretary General. But also after we left public office, we continued our cooperation. And you're quite right. He inaugurated our first Copenhagen Democracy Summit, organized by my foundation, the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, in 2018. We also co-founded a transatlantic commission on election integrity that was created to prevent Russian meddling in our elections. It was established because we saw the Russian meddling in 2016 elections in the United States, and Joe Biden served as member of that commission until he announced his candidacy for the US presidency. So I know him very well. I know a lot of members of his staff and team very well. So I'm confident that he will pursue this idea of the Alliance of Democracies, and I'm sure he will also achieve some positive results.
Well, we're all looking forward to see what happens next. This is a fascinating time in Washington, and so it's always interesting. And I want to thank you for joining us. My guest has been Anders Rasmussen, who is both former Secretary General of NATO and former Prime Minister of Denmark. You can learn more about his organization. It's called the Alliance of Democracies. Their website is allianceofdemocracies.org. And of course, you can always learn more at RealClearPolitics.com. I want to thank you for joining us. And this has been the Real Clear Politics Takeaway. For Real Clear Politics, I'm Andrew Walworth.